Have you ever wondered why so many of the biggest stars of the 1940s and 50s were rarely seen without a cigarette in hand? From Barbara Stanwyck's tough-as-nails persona to John Wayne's rugged cowboy charm, here are 20 worst smoke addictions in Golden Age of Hollywood. 1. Humphrey Bogart. One of Hollywood's greatest stars, Humphrey Bogart is a name most have come to associate with that leading man in the silver screen. From the tough guy roles in Casablanca, 1942, and The Maltese Falcon, 1941, the icon that came to epitomize the gritty, no-nonsense man emerged: Bogart. His love for cigarettes had been so intense that the character could rarely be seen without it. The same was the case with the man behind the mask. Smoking was part and parcel of Bogart's image. It was, in a manner of speaking, part of the attraction. There was an undoubtedly attractive quality to the way he drew on a cigarette when portraying either a detective or a lover. However, with this addiction came consequences. Later years of his life showed ill effects on his health because of his smoking. By the early 1950s, Bogart was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, which is likely to have been a result of his heavy smoking. It is said that he smoked up to 2 packs of cigarettes a day. His battle with cancer was tough, and he passed away in 1957 at the age of 57, far too young for such a legendary figure. Bogart's smoking addiction was part of who he was, but it also cost him his life. He is remembered not only for his iconic roles, but also for the high price he paid for his smoking habit. 2. Lauren Bacall. Another exemplar was Lauren Bacall, a glamorous star of the 1940s, famous for having a deep voice, striking beauty, and on-screen presence that no one can negate. Lauren Bacall became famous after the film To Have and Have Not, 1944, in which she famously shared a passionate kiss with Humphrey Bogart. That on-screen chemistry wasn't just for the cameras. They eventually fell in love and got married in real life. But one thing that defined Bacall's persona, just as much as her acting talent, was her cigarette. She was always seen smoking on camera, and this became one of the mainstays of her glamorous image. Whether she was the femme fatale in noir or the romantic lead, Bacall's cigarette was always around her neck. Her smoky look with mystery and allure was also one of the trademarks of her career. In many ways, Bacall's smoking was a symbol of the golden age of Hollywood itself. Back then, smoking was glamorized, and stars like Bacall made it look chic and sophisticated. It was common to see stars lighting up in films, and Bacall was one of the biggest examples of this trend. However, just like Bogart, Bacall's smoking addiction finally caught up with her too. All along her life, she smoked, and this contributed to all her health problems later on. She passed away from lung cancer in 2014 at the age of 89. 3. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was, of course, Old Blue Eyes, one of the most influential entertainers of the 20th century. He had an unbelievable voice that charmed audiences throughout the world. Sinatra was one of the famous Rat Pack, entertainers who became noted for their late-night parties, heavy drinking, and, of course, smoking. Sinatra was quite the chain smoker part of his glamorous but wild life. Sinatra rarely was found without a cigarette in his hand. Whether he was out on stage, in a recording studio, or hanging around with his Rat Pack buddies such as Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr., there was always one by his side. Smoking in itself was perfect to fit the image of that charming yet rebellious man in the world. He had this cool, laid-back kind of vibe that made him simply irresistible to fans, and smoking became part of that persona. It almost seemed as if the cigarette was an extension of his personality, relaxed, confident, and ready to face the world. But Sinatra's smoking was also a reflection of the lifestyle he lived. He was part of the Rat Pack, often seen in clubs, throwing back drinks and staying up all night. It wasn't unusual for him to light up a cigarette while joking around with his friends. But behind the fun and games, it was clear that smoking was becoming a problem. He smoked constantly, sometimes going through several packs a day. In due course, Sinatra's health began to take the brunt of his smoking. He was diagnosed with severe respiratory issues by the late 1980s and was warned by his doctors to quit smoking immediately. However, at that stage, the damage had already been done. Sinatra eventually quit smoking, but it was a habit he had battled all his life. 4. Katherine Hepburn. Katherine Hepburn was one of Hollywood's most beloved and iconic actresses. Known for her strong will, fierce independence, and unmatched talent, Hepburn had a career that spanned over 6 decades. She was famous for her roles in films like The Philadelphia Story, Your 1940, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, 1967, and On Golden Pond, 1981. She was the ultimate pioneer for women in Hollywood, always breaking barriers and creating roles that no one else before her had ever attempted. But like many of her contemporaries, Hepburn was also famous for her smoking. Her habit was part of her image, and it trailed her throughout her career. Smoking was universally practiced in Hollywood during the 1940s and 1950s, and no one made it look more stylish than Hepburn. She was photographed smouldering away with a cigarette between her fingers countless times, whether she was lounging between takes or dressing up for some fancy shindig. There was something about her that made smoking seem smart and chic, an extension of her attitude. Hepburn's smoking became part of her complete nonconformist attitude. She would not have cared much for the stratagems that other stars followed, and smoking was just one more way she could express her rebellion. She was not out to set examples. She was more interested in doing things her way. Hepburn passed away in 2003, aged 96. 5. James Dean. James Dean is the epitome of teenage rebellion, and the 1955 film Rebel Without a Cause aptly brands him as an icon of youth. He had become an icon in the role of the tormented, misunderstood young man. It was the age of the bad boy in Hollywood, and Dean's performances were raw and emotional, making him the voice of a generation that wanted to break free from the shackles of traditional thought. Dean on screen was as renegade as his on-screen roles. Some images show Dean puffing at a cigarette while filming as well as on set, just going about life in general, and a cigarette always seems to be available for his smoking pleasure. His movies are often filmed with a smoking prop added, which only increased his persona cool and laid-back feel that so many of the fans found him. He was the embodiment of reckless freedom that people found both fascinating and dangerous. Dean smoked because he lived a wild lifestyle. He lived fast, loved hard, and seemed to be bent on pushing boundaries in every part of his life. However, this reckless attitude came with consequences. James Dean tragically passed away in a car accident in 1955 at the age of only 24. It was not his smoking that took his life, but his style of living. Fast cars, living on the edge, and smoking constantly went very well with his rebellious style. 6. Marlene Dietrich. She remains Hollywood glamour and mystery, in contrast with Marlene Dietrich epitomizing the role of Blue Angel 1930 and Morocco 1930. Dietrich has an arresting beauty and sensuality about herself while retaining a sultry voice, and has been one of the glories of the glamorous stars for 2 whole decades, the 1930s and 1940s. But just like James Dean, Dietrich's smoking was just as much a part of her personality as was her acting talent. Dietrich was rarely photographed without smoking, and smoking became one of the features that framed the mystique surrounding her. Whether in a movie or out, a cigarette was almost in her hand, giving everything she did an aura of glamour and sophistication. She smoked in many of her most famous roles, cementing her status as one of the greatest smoking icons in Hollywood history. Dietrich's smoking wasn't just about style, it also reflected the era she lived in. Smoking was highly fashionable in Hollywood at the time, and stars like Dietrich used it to add to their allure. She had a way of making smoking seem elegant, even glamorous. The way she used to place a cigarette between her fingers, blowing the smoke with mysterious glows in her eyes, was one aspect of her trademark style. Not the cigarette, but who she was. She used to be charming, seductive, and completely in control, and never at any point could this style define anyone else but her. However, like most of her peers, Dietrich's smoking habit was costly. She smoked throughout her life, and with age, the after effects of smoking started to appear. She passed away in 1992 at the age of 90, but smoking certainly was a part of some of the health problems she suffered from later in her life. 7. Bette Davis, Hollywood icon. Bette Davis was among the greatest actresses of her era. Her sharp wit, powerful performances, and daring attitude made her a legend that would be remembered for life. Some of her more famous films include All About Eve, 1950, and Jezebel, 1938, films in which she played highly complex, often unlikable characters with unmatched depth and conviction off-screen. She was never afraid to speak her mind and challenge the norms of her industry. Smoking was a big part of Davis's life and her image. Most photographs show her holding a cigarette, which symbolized boldness and fiery rebelliousness. The characters on screen frequently smoke. Cigarettes are used as a symbol of defiance, control, or vulnerability. In reality, Davis's smoking habits symbolized her independent spirit and resistance to Hollywood's expectations for women during that time. She was a trailblazer who fought for better roles and higher pay, breaking barriers for actresses everywhere. However, smoking comes with a cost. Davis was a heavy smoker throughout her life, and it eventually affected her health. She suffered from multiple illnesses in her later years, including strokes and breast cancer, which were likely linked to her smoking. 8. Cary Grant. Cary Grant was the epitome of charm and elegance in Hollywood. With his debonair looks, smooth voice, and impeccable comedic timing, he became one of the most beloved actors of the Golden Age. Starring in classics like North by Northwest, 1959, To Catch a Thief, 1955, and Bringing Up Baby, 1938, Grant's career spanned decades, and he remained a favourite among audiences and critics alike. Grant's public persona was a carefully crafted affair. Smoking fit into his smooth suave. He often stepped out with a cigarette, letting it enhance his polished yet slightly edgy picture. Smoking on screen became such an aspect of his characters as well, adding mystery and charm that audiences couldn't but succumb to. Whether he was an on-screen romantic lead, suave spy, or wisecracking playboy, the cigarette seemed part of him, a perfect appendage to his effortlessly cool movie personality. Off-screen, however, Grant was a chain smoker for most of his life. It figured into the public image and cost him dearly in terms of his health. Many of his contemporaries suffered, like Grant, from smoking as the years went by. 9. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor was Hollywood royalty. Beautiful, with piercing violet eyes and incredibly talented, she dominated the silver screen in such classics as Cleopatra, 1963, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, 1966, and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, 1958. She won 2 Academy Awards for her performances, but it was her personal life, marked by 8 marriages and a flair for the dramatic, that kept her in the public eye. Taylor was also a heavy smoker, and this habit followed her throughout much of her life. Like many stars of her time, she was often seen with a cigarette in hand, both on and off screen. Smoking made a glamorous, unapologetic star who lived life on her terms. In films, her characters frequently lit up, reinforcing the idea that smoking was part of her allure. However, smoking did take its toll on her health. Taylor suffered from many illnesses in her later years, such as congestive heart failure, which was exacerbated by her smoking. Despite her health issues, she remained an iconic figure in Hollywood, both for her acting and her humanitarian efforts. Taylor was a pioneer in awareness campaigns for HIV/AIDS, donating much of her later years to philanthropy. 10. Dean Martin. Dean Martin, known as the King of Cool, was an all-around entertainer who could sing, act, and make people laugh. He was a prominent member of the Rat Pack, exuding effortless charm and charisma. Whether he was crooning hits like That's Amore or starring in films like Rio Bravo, 1959, he had a knack for capturing audiences with his laid-back style and quick wit. Smoking was an integral part of Martin's persona. Whether on stage with the Rat Pack or in films, he rarely appeared without a cigarette. It became a trademark of his easygoing personality, fitting perfectly with his reputation as a fun-loving entertainer who did not take life too seriously. Alongside his whiskey glass, a cigarette was practically a prop for Martin, symbolising the carefree lifestyle that defined his era. As smoking had increased his cool factor, he too had to face the consequences of long-term smoking. Most of his contemporaries have to battle health issues in the latter phase of their lives, most of them being a result of cigarette smoking. 11. Vivien Leigh. Vivien Leigh is best known for her role as Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, 1939, one of the most iconic films ever made. Her portrayal of the strong-willed Southern belle earned her an Academy Award and cemented her place in Hollywood history. Leigh's beauty and talent made her an international star, but her personal life was far more turbulent than the characters she portrayed. Leigh was frequently pictured with a cigarette, exuding smoky glamour as iconic of Hollywood in the 1940s. It wasn't a habit, it was part of her personality. Her characters would use cigarettes on screen to portray feelings, be it defiance, seduction, or vulnerability. However, smoking comes with a price. Leigh suffered from chronic health issues for most of her life. She suffered from tuberculosis and had mental health issues that smoking exacerbated. Despite these problems, she continued to attract audiences through her performances. For instance, she starred in A Streetcar Named Desire, 1951, where she won her second Oscar. 12. Clark Gable. Clark Gable was the quintessential star of Hollywood's golden age. He epitomised the king of Hollywood and appeared in perhaps the most iconic movies he ever made, including, of course, It Happened One Night, 1934, Mutiny on the Bounty, 1935, and of course Gone with the Wind, 1939, opposite his dashing and complex, love-hating Rhett Butler, played by Vivien Leigh. His rugged good looks, charm and commanding screen presence made him a heartthrob for audiences around the world. Gable's on-screen image was often played to a T, reinforcing his man's man persona, and smoking was always a part of that. Whether he was the roguish hero or the romantic lead, there always seemed to be a cigarette dangling from his fingers, perpetuating the image of Gabel as the embodiment of cool masculinity. The same held off-screen. Gabel was often photographed smoking, which became part of his iconic image. But smoking did not go unrewarded for Gabel. Like most stars of his generation, he suffered later in life from health issues, including heart problems caused by years of smoking. 13. Judy Garland. Judy Garland is best known for her iconic performance as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, 1939, which made her an international star at 17. With her heavenly voice and emotional delivery, she has reached hearts around the world. Her hits, such as Over the Rainbow, continue to be timeless classics that cement her place among the greatest performers in Hollywood history. But behind the magic of her performances, Garland's personal life was a whirlwind of challenges. She was put under immense pressure to maintain her wholesome image as a starlet from a very young age. Studios controlled every aspect of her life, from her diet to her work schedule, often resorting to giving her pills to keep her energized during grueling shoots. This led to a lifelong struggle with addiction. Smoking was only one of her habits, but it was another way for Garland to deal with the unrelenting demands of fame. She was often photographed smoking a cigarette, and that encapsulated the complex mix of glamour and pain that defined many stars of her era. Though smoking may have provided some relief for her, it did not help her health in any way, and exacerbated her depression and substance abuse problems. Some of the most celebrated performances in cinema history are in films such as Meet Me in St. Louis, 1944, and A Star is Born, 1954. 14. Errol Flynn. If there was ever a star who embodied adventure and charisma, it was Errol Flynn. Daring roles in films such as The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938, and Captain Blood, 1935, made him the quintessential swashbuckling hero. With his charming smile and natural athleticism, he became one of the biggest box office draws of his time, thrilling audiences with his sword fights, stunts, and romantic escapades on screen. But Flynn's off-screen life was as dramatic as his movies. A man known for partying and living on the edge, he carved his reputation as Hollywood's ultimate bad boy. He just could not be photographed without a cigarette to go with him. Whether he sat on set between takes or did a high-energy stunt, a cigarette seemed like his constant companion. Flynn was an intense chain smoker on and off the screen. He often lit one cigarette with the end of another. This smoking habit, along with a hard-drinking lifestyle, eventually began to take its toll on his health. Flynn's once vibrant energy began to fade as he aged, and his smoking habit contributed to the heart and lung problems he faced in later years. In his struggles, however, stands Errol Flynn as a figure in Hollywood history who has inspired generations of actors and filmmakers. 15. Greta Garbo. Greta Garbo was more than just a movie star, she was a living legend. With an aura of mystery, the actress had a talent for showing deep emotion in just one glance. Performances such as Anna Karenina, 1935, and Camille, 1936, have become timeless. But there was also something unique about the beauty, talent, and almost otherworldly detachment that earned her the nickname the Swedish Sphinx. Part of the mystique of Garbo was that she was private. She was notoriously reclusive, avoiding public view as much as possible. However, one thing that was frequently seen in Garbo was her smoking. Smoking seemed to add an aura of glamour and unavailability to the image of Garbo, a sophistication and intrigue that defined her both in photographs and in her private life too. Though smoking was cool back then, it was a habit with a consequence. Like her contemporaries, Garbo's smoking had certainly impacted her health. But still, she had a very long life and passed away peacefully at the age of 84 in 1990. 16. Paul Henreid. Paul Henreid may not be as widely known as some of his contemporaries, but he was a key figure in one of cinema's most iconic moments. With his smooth voice and refined demeanour, Henreid became a Hollywood favourite in films like Casablanca, 1942, and Now, Voyager, 1942. In Now, Voyager, Henreid performed a legendary scene in the history of cinema. In this film, his character lit 2 cigarettes at once and passed one to Bette Davis in a silent moment of intimacy. This scene, perfectly capturing the romanticism and elegance that dominated much of Henreid's work, also made cigarettes a trademark of sophistication in Hollywood. Henreid wasn't a smoker on screen only. He carried the habit into his personal life as well. Smoking was part of his public image, just like it was for many actors of his time. The casual way he held a cigarette, or lit one for a co-star, made it seem almost like a prop, enhancing his suave, gentlemanly persona. But with this glamorous image of smoking came a price. As was the case with most of his contemporaries, Henreid's health likely suffered because of the habit, but it was common in the industry. 17. Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner was the epitome of Hollywood elegance and allure. Born in North Carolina in 1922, She rose to fame in the 1940s and 1950s with unforgettable roles in movies like The Killers, 1946, Mogambo, 1953, and The Barefoot Contessa, 1954. Known for her stunning beauty, Gardner was one of MGM's brightest stars, often cast in roles that showcased her sultry charm and natural charisma. However, the glamorous image of Gardner was not only about her face, but also about her attitude. She was known to be independent and not afraid to express her opinions, which helped add to her mystique. A cigarette became one of her signature styles, both in real life and on camera. Photos of Gardner are often seen with a cigarette dangling from her lips, an expression of effortless cool. Smoking matched Gardner's character so perfectly, but it came at a great cost. Like most of her contemporaries, she smoked rather heavily, and smoking ruined her health. 18. Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy was one of the most honoured actors in Hollywood's golden age. He was very versatile and naturalistic in his acting style. Born in 1900 in Wisconsin, Tracy spent decades acting and delivered some of the greatest performances of all time in films like Captain's Courageous, 1937, Boys Town, 1938, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, 1967. His presence on screen was magnetic, and his deep, gravelly voice became one of his trademarks. Tracy's magnificent career was also about his ability to emotionally connect with the audiences in his role. There was an air of authenticity he breathed into all his roles that made his characters feel realistic and believable. Whether he portrayed a gruff father figure or a hero in inner conflict, Tracy knew how to make viewers live through his character. But behind the scenes, Tracy struggled with habits that reflected the stress and pressures of his career. He was a heavy smoker, often seen with a cigarette on set or during breaks. Smoking seemed almost inseparable from his rugged, masculine image, but it wasn't just a prop for his roles. It was a daily habit that he couldn't shake. 19. Barbara Stanwyck. Barbara Stanwyck was more than an actress, she was a star. Born in Brooklyn in 1907, Stanwyck reached the spotlight in the 1930s and 1940s with commanding performances in movies like Double Indemnity, 1944, Stella Dallas, 1937, and Christmas in Connecticut, 1945. She played everything from a cunning femme fatale to a warm-hearted mother, captivating audiences with natural talent and magnetic presence. Off-screen, Stanwyck was as forceful as the characters she played. She was known for her no-nonsense attitude, and it was said that she was one of the most hard-working and professional actresses in Hollywood. This tough image was often complemented by her ever-present cigarette. Whether on set or in real life, Stanwyck was rarely seen without one, and her chain-smoking became a hallmark of her persona. 20. John Wayn. When you mention classic Hollywood cowboys, one name comes to mind, John Wayn. Born Marion Robert Morrison in 1907, Wayn became one of the most beloved actors of his era, starring in westerns and war films that defined American cinema. With rugged good looks, towering stature, and a deep, commanding voice, Wayn was the ultimate symbol of toughness and masculinity. Wayn's career took many decades, during which he did some of the most famous performances in movies such as Stagecoach, 1939, The Searchers, 1956, and True Grit, 1969, for which he received an Academy Award. Wayn personified the American West and its ideals, bold, virtuous, and larger than life. His screen persona is so powerful that it seems nearly indistinguishable from himself in real life. That persona also included his smoking habit. Wayn was a heavy smoker, often appearing on and off screen with a cigarette or cigar in hand. Smoking seemed to go hand in hand with his tough guy image, reinforcing the idea of him as a no-nonsense cowboy who could handle anything life threw his way. It became a signature aspect of his style, much like his iconic cowboy hat and boots. Unfortunately, smoking had its cost for Wayn, He was diagnosed with lung cancer in the 1960s and had to have a lung removed. Even after his surgery, he continued smoking cigars, which shows how deep-rooted the habit was in his life.